Now, drinking a glass of milk a day apparently cuts the risk of bowel cancer by almost a fifth, according to the largest study of its kind. Researchers from the University of Oxford have also discovered drinking the equivalent of a glass of wine every day increases the risk by 15%. Joining me now is Dr. Keren Papier, a nutritional epidemiologist and lead researcher of the study. Very good to talk to you today. So just explain to us what this research found. It's a glass of milk. How do you know that this is what is reducing the risk so much?
Well, we did what's the single largest study on diet and colorectal cancer to date, where we followed up over 500,000 women for 17 years on average. And we had a large number of colorectal cancer cases, so over 12,000. So really a large number with a large follow-up suggests that we could be confident in our results. And we really see that the strongest results were, in addition to alcohol, which is a well-established risk factor for colorectal cancer, we saw that calcium had a really strong role associated with a lower risk of colorectal cancer, consuming more calcium.
So we knew that calcium was good at preventing some kinds of cancer, but how are you able to say it's a glass of milk a day?
It's a good question. So the amount of calcium that we looked at, which was about an increase in 300 milligrams, is equivalent to what you might have in a large glass of milk. But what's interesting in our study is that we found that the calcium didn't have to come from dairy. So we saw that the protective role that we're seeing for calcium against colorectal cancer was also true for sources that weren't dairy. So this is things like flours that have been fortified, for instance, that you might find in your bread, or green leafy vegetables, or for instance, even something like soya milk with added calcium. So the calcium was the amount in about a glass of milk, but it doesn't have to come from milk or dairy milk to have this protective effect that we're seeing.
Oh, that's great. So it could be, a cheese sandwich. That could certainly contain quite a lot of it, couldn't it?
We didn't see an association, particularly with cheese, but calcium from cheese would be similar to calcium, that's right, from dairy milk or from soya milk, for example.
Yeah. What are the contributing factors that lead to increases in bowel cancer that your study has shown?
Well, we know that if you want to prevent really any cancer, cutting your smoking and keeping a healthy weight is really the best thing that you can do. But also cutting down your alcohol is something that is related to colorectal cancer and is really a well-established risk factor. Also, cutting down your red and processed meat consumption is a good idea, and making sure that you're taking up screening where you can to make sure that if you can detect it early, then that's the best bet really for prevention.
There are screening programs now in the UK for those over 50. Do those screening programs make a real difference in terms of catching it early?
Absolutely. I mean, screening really does save lives, and especially with something like bowel or colorectal cancer, where you might be able to detect something like a polyp that maybe hasn't gone on to develop to become a cancer. So really, the earliest you could do to prevent really is best.
And of course, drinking milk throughout your whole life, this isn't something that you should just focus on when you're getting older, perhaps more the ages when bowel cancer might be more at risk. Is this something you should be drinking from childhood?
I mean, we have recommendations for how much calcium we should be consuming. We have UK guidelines, and we have different guidelines depending on the different age that you follow. So whether you're an adult or whether you're an adolescent. In this study, we particularly focused on women who were predominantly postmenopausal. So these are adults, grown adults, who are still seeing a positive effect of consuming more calcium. But we do have different needs, of course, across the life stages.
Yeah, and of course, postmenopausal women taking more calcium is great for lots of other things like osteoporosis as well. So it's a double benefit. You mentioned processed meat and red meat. Is there any meat that's really safe to eat if you want to avoid things like bowel cancer?
I think it's about sticking to what we think is a safe idea. So we have good evidence that limiting our red and processed meat consumption to 70 grams a day is best if we're trying to prevent bowel cancer. So that's not saying that you have to have none, but it's not saying to have 400 or 500 grams a day, right? But the evidence is strongest for processed meat, and then we have good evidence for red meat. But for poultry, the evidence isn't suggesting a higher risk. So this is really focusing on red and processed meat, and processed meat in particular.
And do we know and do we understand why calcium intake has this positive effect on the growth of cancer cells?
It's a really good question. We have different hypotheses over the years, and one that's gained a lot of traction is that we think that the calcium itself binds to acids that are in your guts or that are in your colon, so things called secondary bile acids and free fatty acids. And by binding together, they form these sort of soaps. And by forming these insoluble soaps, it is thought that it helps prevent any sort of damage of these acids on the lining of your gut.
Wow, okay. Really interesting stuff. Dr. Keren Papier, really good to talk to you, cancer researcher at the University of Oxford. Thank you very much.